Right. Okay. We're on.
We're on. Hey, welcome everyone. I'm Len Morrison. I'm your career advisor when you arrive here in a few short weeks. So I want to thank you for joining in, and I also want to thank my colleague Justin for organizing this webinar. And before we begin, I just want to let you know that if you have any questions as I'm going along, please send them in, and we'll answer them right away. We don't have to wait until the end. I thought I'd give you sort of an overview first of how the recruiting season went, also to give you a sense of what's coming, and then to talk a little bit more about resume writing. Thank you to those who have sent in your resumes. I've been looking at them. Generally, they're in pretty good shape, so I appreciate the effort you're putting in. Maybe before we begin, I should share with you what I share with all classes, which is, when you arrive on campus as part of the program, employability is really not the primary concern you should have. You are very marketable. Companies will be looking to hire you, but rather the challenge that you're likely to have is deciding what is the best fit for you. Where will you find professional fulfillment? And some of you will be drawn to organizations by the brand. Some of you will be drawn to organizations that offer the most compelling salary. Others will be driving towards geography, while others more the functional aspects of the role. So that's why a few weeks ago I sent out that email that contained the Clifton Strengths Finder assessment. I urge you to do that. That will be a powerful resource that I think will be very enlightening for you, because when things start in the fall, they go quite rapidly. We're already building the fall recruiting schedule and the programming, and the more that you can do now in June, the better you'll be in the fall. But I'll touch more on that in a little bit. I'm sure many of you are interested in knowing how last season went. I can share with you plenty of data about it. It went quite well, on par with previous years. Just to summarize, at graduation, which was a few weeks ago, 89% of our students, residential students, and I'm only referring to residential students, not the blended or a combined residential and blended, just residential. This is your program. 89% of the students had offers. Many of you might be asking, well, what percent of international versus domestic students? 90% of US students had offers. 85% of international students had offers. So very good numbers. 84% overall had accepted the offers. One accepted an offer after graduation. So generally, just about 90% are off and ready to begin working very soon. I think another important note is that 93% of students are working in the US. That's the advantage of this program. For those of you who are from other countries, the OPT STEM extension is a really powerful asset. So far, everyone who has wanted to work in the US is working in the US. I think another important note is that 80% of graduating students secured their position through the efforts of the supply chain program and MIT. This is not a case of many students seeking opportunities through their own personal and professional networks. Not that I don't encourage that, I do, but you're paying a lot of money to come to MIT, to come to the SCM program, and there's an expectation that we are going to be very responsible for helping you secure your position. And for this year's class, it was 80%, which we're very happy with. I'll talk also about compensation, which was also very strong. It's based on 93% of students providing salary information. So a very high percentage. I want to say that right off the bat. Average US comp, base comp for this year's class, 126 for US students. For US students, the average signing bonus was $24,000. For international students, average base salary was 127, average signing bonus was 25. So combined average base 126.5, and the median combined base was 130, and the average signing bonus combined 24, median signing bonus 20. So again, numbers are, I think, fairly comparable with last year's. We haven't seen too much of an outlier, and honestly, much of that compensation is driven by individuals who secured opportunities in fields that tend to pay more. Those fields tend to be tech, they tend to be consulting. They also tend to be in the Bay Area or in Seattle. So if you're securing positions in Middle America or in industries outside of those, expect that the compensation would be in line with those industries and in line with those geographical areas, and they would be somewhat less. But frankly, if you are looking for opportunities outside of very expensive areas, your dollar goes a lot farther, and in the long run, you're probably making out better financially. And also, we talked briefly about signing bonuses. 89% received a signing bonus that was associated with their salary. So again, very high percentages here. These numbers will change, I'm sure, as the remaining students secure positions and provide us with information. My guess is they'll decline. I don't think they'll decline materially, but they will decline because as students secure positions beyond graduation, they may be less selective. They may be more likely to choose the position over holding out and waiting for a higher salary. So generally, that's a trend that we tend to see. However, I don't want to encourage you to begin focusing so heavily on fall recruiting because you think that the salaries in the fall are going to be higher than they are in the spring. That's not the case. In fact, like previous years, we have a strong push in the fall. Then we have a period of dormancy, I would say, as we get into the holidays, and activity starts to pick up in late February and March, and it really accelerates in April and May when companies have more visibility into their hiring for June and July starts. So it does go in cycles, but that's just something to sort of keep aware of. Some great companies did hiring this year. I can speak to those briefly. Multiple hires were at Apple, Alex Partners, A.T. Kearney, Amazon, Google, but other organizations included BASF, Chewy, Dell, Gap, KPMG, Luxottica, Microsoft, Motorola, Niagara, U.S. Steel, Walmart, multiple hires, Wayfair, multiple hires. So again, strong list of companies, leaders in the industry, tech consulting heavily represented. So you should be optimistic. You should be very encouraged. With that in mind, I think it's important to share with you some of the success factors that contributed to these results. First and foremost, the students who tend to do very well in interviews, who tend to secure multiple offers, who tend to get opportunities that they truly want, are those who are able to tell their story in a very effective, a very authentic, a very compelling way. So telling your story is really the theme for the program from a career perspective. You'll have impeccable credentials. You have the power of MIT's brand and the supply chain brand behind you. The challenge for most is how are students able to effectively tell their story in an interview as part of the networking that leads up to interviews and so forth. So we spend a tremendous amount of time on that, and it begins with the self-assessment. So again, I want to reiterate the importance of completing the Clifton Strengths Assessment. We pay for that. I can monitor who's taken it, who hasn't taken it. All of you will be required to take it, but I recommend that you do it now in the next week or two. I guess the other key success factor for students who were landed positions were those that were able to comfortably interact with alumni. So the alumni of the SCM program are an amazing resource. I've worked with graduate students, MBA students for many, many years, and I have never seen alumni who are as loyal, as committed to the program as these alums. I couldn't count the instances where students have come in and have said that they had great conversations with so-and-so at this organization, and ultimately, these types of referrals, if you will, these relationships lead to employment. So the students who were most successful clearly had the ability to connect with alums either through LinkedIn or through the MIT Alumni Directory or through the MIT Career Advisors Hub. So the alums are there, they want to help, and we're going to be creating numerous opportunities for you to connect with alumni. In fact, I really view my role as a connector, someone who coaches and connects, but builds the bridge between you and alumni. So again, the two most important factors here are the ability to tell your story and the ability to connect and build relationships with alumni. Those are important. I did mention, have any questions coming in?
We don't have any questions
No
yet,
questions?
Len.
Really?
You're doing a great job.
I am shocked. Please send them in. So consulting, I would assume a number of you are very interested in consulting organizations. They're well represented in the recruiting program. My advice to you is to begin early preparing. Even if you're just thinking about consulting, it takes an enormous amount of preparation. I'll almost go so far as to say, like, you will be very challenged to be prepared for the consulting resumes relative to your peers in Sloan. And that's because they're in a 2-year program. They have a 1-year head start on understanding the case interview, on preparing for case interviews, on understanding the models and the thought process. So there's a lot of information in Dropbox, probably more than you can absorb, on consulting. But if you are thinking about pursuing consulting, particularly with top organizations, now is the time to spend learning those methods to prepare. I would also recommend letting me know if you are interested in consulting, but more importantly, letting your classmates know. I think it would be very helpful if you were to form groups to prepare, groups to go through cases over and over. I'll say weeks on end, but that may be what's necessary to prepare for some of these very challenging case interviews that you can expect in the fall. So consulting, many students go into consulting. I won't say it's for everyone. It's not. Those who have been in consulting know better. They probably are looking to move on in another direction, which is perfectly fine. But for those who have an interest in it, explore, work with others, collaborate, and it'll increase your chances for success. The model for recruiting in the fall is beginning, I think the earliest info session that I've booked so far is September 12th. We invite companies for the most part to come in during lunch hours when you're free. So they provide the lunch, you sit and absorb the information that they're providing. Companies will then oftentimes have office hours at the conclusion of the info session. So we'll go into our breakout rooms. Maybe it'll be one-on-one, maybe it'll be smaller, numbers of two and three students at a time, working or speaking to an employer rep. Yes, they're office hours, but they are evaluating you. Are they a formal interview? Not a formal interview, but you are in a position to form impressions about them, and they are assessing you. So first impressions are important. I would suggest you take that into account during these office hours, because after office hours, there may be an initial phone screen followed by a second phone interview. Usually upon the conclusion of that, candidates are selected to fly to different destinations for a rounds of interviews that may occur over a day, sometimes longer. And then offers from the fall generally occur in the November timeframe. You have until December, maybe early January, to make decisions. Don't be surprised if you have certainly multiple opportunities to interview throughout the fall and multiple offers to juggle. And sometimes it becomes really difficult to make those types of decisions unless you've done that self-assessment in advance to get a sense of what's important to you. What are you looking for in your next role? Because you can really take the issue or the concern of employability off the table. That's not the challenge. The challenge will be finding the right role for you. And I think the more you self-assess and explore and connect with alumni in advance of arriving here, the more prepared you'll be.
We do have a few questions.
If we want finally
to do those. So
okay.
Okay. So the first question: if there are companies that they're interested in that aren't necessarily actively recruiting our students on campus, do we do anything as far as reaching out on their behalf? What type of support do we provide to students seeking employment at other companies?
We'll help you in any way that we can. So if you wish to do it all on your own, that's perfectly fine. We may have contacts. We may provide you with advice on how you can identify alumni at the organization to help you get into the organization. But we have, I was contacted by a student earlier who is making inroads themselves with a number of consulting organizations. We do not have core recruiting relationships with like a McKinsey or a Bain, or although we sort of do with BCG, but so we have to be creative with how we get in front of those. Many students in the past who might be interested in those organizations worked pretty closely. They had connections at Sloan. They worked their way into becoming familiar with the Sloan Consulting Club, which is different than the MIT Consulting Club. So Sloan has quite a sort of a barrier around it. It's a very, it's kind of off limits to us, and not that that's too much of a concern, because they're focused on employment opportunities for 400 plus students in a class. But we do have some overlap with organizations that hire for supply chain roles, and there is some overlap there where we collaborate quite well. But generally, to answer your question, if there are organizations, let me know. I'm happy to share connections that I may have that you could take advantage of.
Great. So the second question you kind of already answered. So it was, does MBB consulting companies offer the same roles as they do to MBA grads?
I would say yes, they do. They do. So we had a student last year who went to McKinsey. 2 years ago, BCG was fairly strong. The challenge is BCG will begin recruiting in a few weeks. So if you're not up to speed on preparation for that case interview, it's going to be a challenge. So Mark Costantino's book, Case in Point, is a terrific resource. And online, you'll see a lot of case packages from Sloan, from Wharton, Chicago, Columbia, and so forth to help you practice this method of case interviewing.
Great. Yeah, I mean, my 2 cents is just keep Len informed of everything that you're doing. Because if we don't know what you're up to and where you're applying to, then, you're on your own.
And I, my office is literally, 10 feet from where you will live for the entire year. So you'll be seeing me all day, every day. Keep me informed. I keep detailed notes tracking progress and where people are at. So the more information you share with me, the better. The more I can make connections and point you in the right directions and so forth.
So we did have another question just come in. Can you elaborate a bit more on the collaboration with Sloan that you mentioned? And
Yeah,
I can just put my two
sure.
cents in. I mean, inevitably, as I've mentioned, you're going to be taking some courses most likely in Sloan. So you have just informal networking opportunities to meet students in that program. I think, as Len mentioned, they do have kind of their own groups, organizations. I think it just depends on the group and the organization whether you have the opportunity to participate in whatever they may or may not be doing.
Yeah, a lot their resources are password protected, Sloan ID. So you're not going to have access to their recruiting platform. Some of the clubs are very difficult to join. However, you're going to be in classes with Sloan students. You're going to learn that there's a company coming on campus having an info session. You're going to learn. So for example, we had a student last year who joined the Sloan Retail Club. Had a great experience participating. So I would say keep your ears open, be creative. So for example, Sloan has their own career fair, a dedicated career fair, only for Sloan. I'm not encouraging students from SCM to attend the career fair. However, students did. They reported back they found it worthwhile. So there are ways that students have, I would say, taken advantage of some of the resources that are out there in the business school. But for the most part, Sloan is very heavy in financial services, and SCM, there's very little overlap with financial services. Most students coming into our program are not going towards venture capital or private equity or banking and so forth. So, but there are opportunities around supply chain oriented, retail oriented, product, even, maybe product management opportunities. So keep your ears and eyes open.
So that's all we have for now.
Okay. So I'd like to move in next with the resume slide deck that I'll go through. And I received, of the resumes I've received, generally they're quite good. I will go through each resume starting probably later this week, and I will send back my comments, and those will be individually, and they'll be tailored to you in particular. But in terms of the agenda, let me just scroll down here. Okay.
So we'll be moving to a PowerPoint presentation, but again, at the end, we can go back and wrap up if there's any questions or anything.
Right. Great. So agenda, I want to cover the purpose of the resume, the strategy, some sections of the resume, and ultimately the finished product. And I'll take some questions. When we get to you want to go through that? Yeah. Okay, great. So, when we're addressing sort of the purpose of the resume, it's really, it's to tell your story. It's, someone should read the resume and get a pretty good sense of who you are. It's more than just a listing, a chronological listing of everything that you've done. It should be tailored to the organizations and or the industries that you're targeting. Its primary role is to just get the interview. Compared with the CV, it's going to be much more focused. Doesn't have to provide any personal information. It doesn't have to cover the entirety of your career, particularly if it goes back many, many years. And you should have several versions of your resume. So what I recommend is that most of you have a resume that you're quite happy with. If you do have some concerns, I would recommend making a very long resume. Make a 2-page resume. Make a 3-page resume. This is the resume you're going to keep in your file. And you're going to selectively pull those achievements, those accomplishments from that mega resume to craft one that's tailored towards the role that you're targeting. And that's important. It's a tailored document. It's a forward-looking document. Obviously factual. The cover letter is an opportunity to be more persuasive, but resumes get read, and the quality of resumes makes a big difference in the selection process. So again, I'm touching on here the importance of relevancy. And I think before you craft the resume, if you do know the role that you're targeting, think about what are the core skills, the core assets that resonate with that employer, with that hiring manager, and try to incorporate that into the resume. Review job descriptions, review LinkedIn profiles of people in those roles to get a sense of what they're looking for. Particularly true for those of you who are changing industries, which may be many. What's might be true in the oil and gas industry is not going to apply to technology. So you want to minimize those distracting elements in an oil and gas resume, sort of neutralize them, and somehow make those experiences relevant to a manager in the tech industry. And to do that, you're going to highlight your transferable skills. So transferable skills really address the how. How did you do something? It's not just necessary to only address what you did. It's important for the how, because take for example, you're in the oil and gas industry. The what you did in oil and gas may not be transferable, but the skills that contributed to how you did it would be. So many of the comments that I'll share back with you on your resume, I'll put in in a question mark. How did you do this? And I'll expect that you'll be able to indicate that. Obviously, contributions and accomplishments. Sometimes I recommend picking 3 themes in the resume to address. So you don't want to present this picture that you're everything to everyone. Pick 3 themes about you. Maybe it's that you're data centric. Maybe that's your executive presence. Maybe it's something about your analytical skills or your business development skills. But there's generally 3 themes that might characterize your professional work experience to date. I think it would be very helpful to focus on that. Most of you have probably heard of the STAR model: situation, task, action, and result. This should be how you frame and model your accomplishments. Describe the situation, the task at hand or the task that was required, the action you took, and the results that you achieved. So, what we're trying to do here is make it easy for the recruiter to see the match. We want them to go through your resume and begin circling keywords, key accomplishments, key assets that are relevant to the role. So if you don't know the role that you're applying for, it's pretty hard to tailor the resume to it. So here's an example of formatting. This is modeled after the template that I sent out, although it may not be exact, but it's a clean resume. It's crisp. There's white space, but not too much white space. There's not lengthy paragraphs. There's more hard-hitting bullets. It's not overly italicized. It's 1 page. And believe me, I've seen people with 15 years experience condense their resume to 1 page. That's what our employers expect. They comment very favorably on our resumes, so we do recommend that this format work. I'm not going to hold you to it, but certainly when we create resume books, we expect this level of consistency. And resume books will be produced, continuously throughout the year. So we'll want to have the resumes done and completed to me by no later than mid-July, 2nd week in July. So you have a couple more weeks or so to complete them. But this is generally how it should look. Break it down. Your name, obviously, the largest font, bold it. Use your MIT email address. If you're challenged by space, as I indicate here, keep everything on 1 line. Don't use the 1 Amherst Street address. That's our address, but use your own cell phone, your own MIT email. reverse chronology, and this is, what I've seen to date. So you're following the template quite well. The degree is either expected next June or you're a candidate for. Pretty straightforward in terms of the education section. For the experience, notice what we're bolding and what we're not bolding. Notice what we're italicizing. And here's some ways to create dates that at least allow you to maintain a degree of consistency. And again, for the most part, you're conforming to the template, so I don't see, I don't see a real problem here. The next section is, let's see, okay, so where you're highlighting your experience, again, reverse chronological order. If you're with an employer, like in this instance, Infra Partners, may not be well known in the US, but feel free to put a bullet, or rather a line underneath it, italicized, indicating what industry that employer is in. Just a single line is sufficient. Paragraph versus bullet. I think bullets are more helpful, easier to read, but a bullet doesn't have to be a single line. You don't want to have more than 5 or 6 bullets in an experience. So try to condense those bullets into, 3 or 4 sentences, again, using that STAR method. What I've seen, and I want to just put this warning out there, is that the resume is not a list of responsibilities. It's not copying the job description. That is not what it is. In fact, what we're trying to do here is to highlight those achievements, and only those achievements which you feel are relevant to the next employer. And I fully expect that I'm going to be addressing resume suggestions that focus on this, and that also focus on your ability to highlight your transferable skills. That will be the thrust of my comments. So you're going to see that I write on a lot of resumes, how, question mark, and then I'll put in parentheses, including, involving, requiring. In other words, to prompt you to indicate how you achieved what you did. And past tense is obviously important. Action verbs. Here's a really good site, Resume Genius. For example, if you're in the tech field, you can bring up some tech action verbs. That's very important. It allows you to differentiate, not to repeat words, and you'll also be able to avoid those soft sounding verbs. Responsible for, responsible just means that you were supposed to do it. Doesn't mean that you did it. So we don't really want to have responsible in the resume. We want to focus on stronger action-oriented verbs. And this is a really good site that can help you with that. And I know a number of you have been on VMOC as well, so a similar type of helpful tool. So again, just to go over the STAR method, and interestingly enough, we're going to be applying this to your interview prep, but the situation is important. Summarize the role, the company, and the project that you were involved in very briefly, and then focus on how you achieved it. And there's different ways to do that, as you can see. At the conclusion of the achievement, let's try to quantify those results. And we can do that by volume, margin, dollars. There's different way to quantify your achievements. And as I think back on the resumes that were most hard-hitting and most impactful this year, were those students who could quantify their efforts. And that's particularly important with consulting organizations. Quantification of achievements. So here's some examples of, sort of the STAR scenarios. How did you reduce cost, time? How did you improve productivity? What was the impact on sales, market share? Did you complete a project before deadline? If so, how much before deadline? If you identified new markets, how did you identify new markets? What was the impact? So I think these are some sort of scenarios to consider. Again, these are highlights that you would expect a recruiter to begin circling on the resume, highlighting them, underlining them. So here's an example which, again, focuses on the before and the after. Customer complained the software was difficult to install, instructions weren't helpful. The action was a collaboration with the R&D team. A hotline was established, purchased, and the result. So you're breaking down that achievement. You're focusing on the STAR method. And here we're resummarizing it and condensing it into 2 bullets using action verbs and quantifying achievements. I think this is a pretty good example of how we took an achievement and made it a little bit more hard-hitting, a little bit more impactful. As we move further down the resume, you see skills and interests or achievements. I mean, there's different ways to frame it, but I think those achievements that are most relevant are important to consider because they shed light on who you are. A lot of individuals list some kind of random interests. I'm not opposed to random interests, but if you do list it, at least be quite confident that you can speak about it in an interview. You don't want to be listing interests that are so random that you're just adding them to fill space. Focus on those that you're naturally passionate about or feel committed to or are most proud of participating in, because it certainly makes for a more interesting conversation, and it sheds insight into who you are. But here are certainly some examples. So, programming languages and software are particularly important. All of you have very strong analytical skills. All of you are likely to list programming languages and software at the bottom of the resume. My preference is for you to build those into the body of the resume. You can also list them at the bottom, but if you used R or SAS or, VBA or Excel macros, advanced functionality, advanced data analysis tools, build them into the body of the resume to address the how question. How did you analyze that data? By using X, Y, and Z. The final product, obviously your name's in the file name, spell check it. Sometimes I don't even recommend that you spell check because there are certain things that won't be caught by spell check. But I have kind of an odd eye for typos in resumes, so I tend to catch a lot. Consistent verb tense is important. Read it out loud, read it backwards, reread it again, have someone else read it. All of this goes into producing a final product that is flawless. The interesting point here about sharing your resume with those who are in the field that you wish to go into, because now you will learn the vernacular, you'll learn the terminology, maybe even the jargon that would catch the eye of someone who may be in a role that you wish to pursue. So that's where sharing your resume and getting feedback can be very helpful. Obviously, you're going to track where and when resumes are being sent, and you're going to have multiple copies that you'll bring into interviews with you. So, I quickly covered a lot of ground there. I think we'll make this presentation available to them. But yes, refer to this. As I said before, I'm beginning to go through the resumes to add my comments and to flesh out areas of concern. And I'll scan those back to you. You'll send it in again. There might be a second round of minor revisions, and then they'll be ready for the resume book. I'd like to have the resume book done by the end of July. I'll say the first week in August. You can always change the resume and send in new versions, but I've already had companies that are asking for it. So please indicate, also one last thing, please indicate on the top of the resume if you're a U.S. citizen, because some of you may have permanent residency or be U.S. citizens. It may not be apparent. So if you are, indicate it on the top of on the resume.
So we did have one question come in while we spoke. So as you know, many students in our program do fall within the 3 to 7 years of work experience range, but some students do have more than that. So can you maybe just speak to, do you see roles come through that might be more tailored to someone with more experience, higher leadership roles, maybe specifically in retail tech or supply chain tech that might be similar
Sure.
to the students in the SDM program in Sloan?
Sure. So I can't speak to the SDM program as much, but companies like Wayfair, Amazon, Google would be hiring graduates with that, maybe on the more experienced level, 5 to 7, 7 to 10 even, for senior program manager roles, most common. That would be the overlap with an MBA program, senior program manager positions, highly compensated, highly selective. So I would put Wayfair, Google, Amazon in that category.
Great. So we don't have any more questions. I had a few thoughts pop into my mind just to let you know. We will end up ordering business cards that are SCM branded. However, we do wait until orientation because many students do end up getting different phone numbers and different contact information that they can't really necessarily arrange until they arrive here. So just a heads up, I know people are very eager to get those usually because, like Len mentioned, we hit the ground running, but just wanted to manage expectations with that. Just as a reminder, as I mentioned before, I'll be reaching out to you next week with some information about moving forward with SC0X review. I did send an email last week, so if you have not read that, definitely take a look, and there's a survey. I want to reiterate again that the shirt sizes do run large, so keep that in mind. That's all I have. I don't know if you have any final thoughts, Len.
Yeah, self-assessment over the summer. Connect. Think about organizations that you're interested in. All of the companies that have recruited over the last few years are online. You may have other organizations like the questioner brought up. Let me know who they are. I'm happy to share contacts that I may have, alums at those organizations. But obviously on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. Not all of you have. Many of you have, obviously. But the alums are so willing to help. And enjoy the next few weeks before you arrive. I will, we're going to be busy.
And kind of a segue, we have one more question, and it says, do capstone projects lead to job offers? And, some of the first companies that you're going to be networking, I guess, with are companies that sponsor capstone projects during orientation. So I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of instances where students did land offers from their capstone sponsor companies. The majority of them are CTL exchange partners, so they pay a considerable fee to be able to participate in the capstone projects. And as partners, they very much want to recruit from the program, and that's an enormous benefit that we provide them. So, I can think of BASF this year. Yeah, I have to give some thought to that. But an interesting instance happened last year where a student was doing a project with J&J, and J&J got around to offering them positions, but they had already accepted positions. But they said, hey, listen, even though we've already accepted positions, there's a student in our class who is super sharp, and you need to interview him. And they made the connection for one of the students who ended up going with J&J. So you will find that this program is all about collaboration, and supporting one another. It is not about competing amongst yourselves. That doesn't exist here. It never has. It never will. It is about supporting one another, because the opportunities are really plentiful for everyone. It's about finding the right fit, knowing yourself, knowing the role, and focusing on telling your story. And that's going to be our thrust. The resume is the first step in that. Actually, the second step. The first step is the strengths assessment.
Great. Well, I think we'll end there.
So email me any questions. I'm usually very responsive. I have some vacation time coming up at the end of July, first week in August. I'm going to try to not respond to any emails at that point. But before then, fire away.
Great. All right. Well, until next time, thanks for joining.